Dr. D here with another video on music production. Today we're going to learn about Pro Tools. Pro Tools for Beginners. So we're going to start with the basics of Pro Tools and how to start a session and get going and recording music right away. So let's get to it. Okay, so when you open up Pro Tools and start a session, I'm going to call it demo and save it on my desktop, but you are prompted to select some file types, sample rate, bit depth. Sample rate and bit depth are kind of like the quality that you're going to be recording. Basic CD quality is going to be 44.1 kilohertz and 16-bit. So that's kind of the standard CD quality. Most people record at a higher sample rate and bit depth. I usually go at 4824. Depends on what I'm doing. And I also always choose the stereo mix, the I/O settings. So what this does is it basically uses like your previous sessions names for outputs and buses and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, stereo mix is always kind of how I start. And then I make sure that I save somewhere where I'm aware of, like if it's on an external hard drive, or I save to my desktop. So currently I'm going to save to my desktop. Okay, so boom, Pro Tools opens up, but first let me just introduce you, because this is a point of confusion for a lot of my students. When you have created your Pro Tools session, it goes into a folder, okay? So inside of this folder is a collection of things. There's the Pro Tools session file, which is the PTX file. There is a folder for the audio files, bounce files, blah, 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 all this other stuff. If you want to send this to another computer or ship it over the internet and open this somewhere else, you need to keep this whole entire folder intact. It needs to have the audio files and everything in here. So basically this folder, this main folder that shows up on your desktop, this is what you're going to want to zip or compress and then send to whoever you're sending this to. Okay, when we open up Pro Tools, we have a blank edit and a blank mix window, okay? And the first thing I want to do here is create some tracks so we have something to look at. You can go up to track and select new track, or you can use the keyboard shortcut, which on a Mac would be Command-Shift-N. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to create 3 mono audio tracks. There are several different types of tracks, but if you're going to record with a microphone or you're going to record some kind of instrument through your interface, mono audio tracks is going to be what you want to start with. There's several other types of tracks, master, faders, auxiliary inputs. We'll talk about those things a little bit later, but today, mono audio tracks. I'm going to create those 3 mono audio tracks, and I see those in my mix view showing up as faders, and I see that in my edit view as kind of the linear sort of track visual that you're used to with most DAWs. So the thing I like about Pro Tools a lot is it's very basic, it's very straightforward. It looks a lot like an analog console. It's one of the earlier DAWs to be developed, so it's very much modeled after what an analog recording mixing console would be. It's also very transparent with the way that things are routed. So when I teach classes in audio production, I use Pro Tools a lot to kind of help students understand the routing of signal through buses and some tracks and effects returns and all that kind of stuff. You manually have to set that stuff up, where in some other DAWs like Ableton and Logic, it kind of takes those steps for you. So let's look at the layout of Pro Tools. So I can toggle between the edit window and mix window on a Mac with Command =. Let's start with the edit window here. At the very top, on the left side, if you want to work within a grid, your selection point snaps into a grid. You want to be on grid mode. If you want to be able to freely stretch and select and move tracks anywhere within that linear timeline, you're going to want to use slip mode. I usually work within slip mode until I have something that's gridded out, or something with a click track with a metronome, and have it all kind of gridded out, and then that's kind of more of a useful thing. This is your collection of tools. I always set my tool selection on Smart Tool, which is basically this little bracket that goes over these 3 main tools. Okay, this is the time counter, your main counter. This is going to give you like your time code or bars and beats or minutes and seconds, whatever the time increment or measure increment is. You can select between these by clicking on that drop down arrow right there. A lot of times if I'm recording music, I will go into bars and beats because I might want to use bars and beats and look at measures and whatnot. But if I'm recording something that isn't really necessarily in time, like a voiceover, I'll look at minutes and seconds, and that changes kind of my ruler at the very top here. So depending on the context, music, bars and beats, minutes and seconds for things like dialogue and Foley and sound design stuff. To engage the grid, to show the grid, there's this button right here where you can see that the grid lines have showed up, or I can hide the grid lines. This series of controls right here is like your play, record, and stop, and then return to 0 and forward and reverse kind of buttons. In the beginning of each track, you're going to see an generic audio track name. If you create 8 tracks or 3 tracks, it's going to go audio 1, 2, 3, 4. The way that you rename your tracks before you record them is to double click on the nameplate there, and this little window pops up where you can name things. Like I might call it vocal 1, and I can now go through the series of the rest of my tracks easily by going to next and rename the second track Vox 2. So when I create a session and create all the tracks that I'm going to be needing for my project, I rename them right away. And the reason I do that is because as soon as you start recording audio, it's going to name that audio file that it's creating, that WAV file, whatever that track name is. So if everything's audio 1, 2, 3, 4, it's not going to tell you much. It's better to have like kick drum, snare drum, bass drum, voice, guitar in the name of the file, the audio file that's being recorded, so that you can find it later a little bit easier. Okay, so on each of these tracks, you're going to have a record enable button. Track solo basically solos one track and mutes all the other tracks, and then the mute button. The next little area on my Pro Tools DAW is the input selector and output selector. So I can choose which input from my audio interface that I'm going to use. I can also choose the output, whether that's an interface output or the output's going to be some sort of bus. So that's more of an advanced routing thing. We'll get to that in another video. But I'm going to switch on over and look at my mix view. Okay, so first of all, at the very, very top, we have an area where we have inserts. Inserts are essentially like plugins. So in each of these little inserts, I can choose a plugin like reverb or EQ or compression onto a specific track. The next area is the sends. And what sends do is it takes a portion, almost like a duplicate of that track signal, and routes it to another location. We use these for the purpose of effects, sends and returns, or sub mixes of groups of instruments. There's another video on that. Check that one out, but I won't go into detail about that. And then there's the I/O, which stands for inputs and outputs. That's where I need to select the input on my interface that I wish to be recording off of. They'll generally be set to the stereo output of your interface, which is going to be something like left, right output. So I don't usually mess with that until I'm doing some other routing thing. There is a panning knob where you can change the panning left and right. If I click on any knob or any fader and hold down Option, it will bring it back to unity or back to 0. So that's kind of a cool trick there. Down here we have the input monitoring, record enable, stereo and mono. This is a great thing. I can kind of demonstrate this right now, but if you can hear the there's kind of a delay with this signal. You can kind of hear it in the speakers. But when I put on input monitoring, it takes that delay away and it's a little bit more synced up with the initial volume of my voice. Because rather than having this audio signal travel all the way through my computer's processor and then come back out of the processor into my speakers, it just takes the signal directly from the microphone. When you're recording voice to a track, this is a great thing to use because it takes the latency off. Okay, cool. Then we have the fader. And down here you can see some other readings for the track name and the track color, and there's an area for notes too. If you want to type some notes about the session or about that specific track, you can put some notes down there in that little box. Okay, excellent, sweet. So let's record an audio track, just something to work off of, and let me demonstrate some of the basic editing tools here. I'm going to record enable, make sure that my input is set to the same channel of my interface that has the mic plugged into it. I can see signal now, so that means that I'm getting audio signal into that track. So if I'm not getting any signal coming in on one of my channels and my microphone's plugged into the right input and I have phantom power on and all those things should be working, I need to go up into my setup and check my playback engine. The playback engine is either going to use the built-in sound settings of your computer, like the microphone and the speakers of your computer, or if you have an interface plugged into your computer that you're using, an audio interface, you need to set that playback engine as the interface. Another thing that you'll find in here is the buffer size. Now, buffer size can be lowered or raised to give less latency. So you notice it's in samples. So the higher the sample rate, the higher the quality of the audio that you're monitoring with. You can change this to a lower sample rate when you're recording and a higher sample rate for when you're mixing. Okay, another thing you can do in Pro Tools to get that weird echo delay thing that happens with a microphone or a guitar input is to turn on low latency monitoring. Okay, and you're going to find that down here. You can turn on low latency monitoring, and it'll kind of compensate for that latency. After I record enable that track, I need to record enable from the transport player up at the top as well. So this needs to be armed, this needs to be armed, and then at this point I can hit the play button or the space bar, which works as the play button, and that's going to start my recording. Hey, hey, hey. Okay, so there we go. We got some audio to look at now. I'm going to turn off the record enable so my microphone isn't live. And listen back to this.
Microphone check.
There it is.
Record.
Okay, so I can hear my audio. Now, zooming in and zooming out. This is another really important function of the edit window that you're going to want to know. R for zooming out, T for zooming in. Now, if this doesn't work, you're going to need to come over here. You see this little AZ right in the corner of that window? That is the command key focus. So it can be set to be on any little window that has a little AZ in it, and there's a series of keyboard shortcuts and commands that kind of like focus on that window. So if you're working in your edit window, you want to have that enabled so that R and T function as a zoom in and zoom out. You can stretch out the size of the track if you want to see more of the waveform, if you put your cursor in between. Okay, so back up here to the top. Now that we have audio to look at, this button right here that has the left and right, that's another way of zooming in and zooming out, the left and right, two sides of that. This window, or this button right here, if I click on the top, it's going to expand my waveform, my visual waveform up and down. So a lot of the times I'll start with a healthy signal that reflects where my audio signal is on my meters. So meter is located right there on your edit window, and of course it's going to show up on the fader as well in the mix window. Let me talk about these three tools right here. There is the trim tool, there's the selector tool, and the grabber tool. Okay, so with the smart tool engaged, I can use all three of those tools simultaneously. So depending on where my cursor is. If my cursor is on the top half of the waveform, I can use it as the selector. Like I can select this piece of audio, or I can, highlight this area and hit delete to like delete spaces of audio in between a vocal track or something. If I want to move the audio around, the little clips of waveform audio, I use the grabber tool. The grabber tool happens when I move my cursor to the bottom half of the waveform. You see how it turns into the little hand. So when the hand is engaged, I'm at the bottom here, I can move these pieces of audio wherever I see fit. Okay. Another good thing to know is how to split a piece of audio. So if I put my cursor right here and I want to split these two pieces of waveform apart, I can use Command E, and that will split the waveform apart. I can also do that with B, I found out. Just the letter B will split audio wherever that insertion point is. I'm calling this little B will split the audio too. So Command E or B will split audio. Okay, so when I put my cursor in the center on the left or right, this tool shows up. This is the trim tool. Okay, so I can trim audio out, basically extend from where I trimmed earlier out, or I can trim back in. Because Pro Tools works on what's called non-destructive editing. So that means in your audio files folder, if I go back to my desktop and I look at the audio files inside of that main folder, what I really have is a solid audio track that I recorded. No matter how much editing I do, this track is going to remain intact. Another really good tool to know about is the fade tool. The fade tool, one easy way to do it with the mouse is to put the cursor on the top or top left or right of a piece of audio, and you see that little box with the shade on it. That's how I can add a fade. If I zoom in a little bit, it's easier to see. I can put fades on the beginnings or the ends of my segments of audio that I've trimmed or edited. Okay, so another way of doing that is to select across a portion of the end of the audio track and use Command F. And this brings up this fade in setting where I can change the slope of the fade to be whatever I want it to be, if I want it to be kind of more concave like that. Another cool thing about these fades, if I remove all the fades that I've done, Command Z, of course, for undo, your best friend. Cut, copy, paste, of course, works great here. You guys know about cut, copy, paste. So Command or Control on a PC, Z is undo, Command X is cut, and Command C is copy. So I can select an audio file or a piece of the waveform here, Command C to copy it, put my cursor over here, Command V to paste. So cut, copy, paste works great, undo, all that good stuff, redo, it's all active in Pro Tools. But if I want to add fades globally, meaning I want to put fades on every little cut of audio I've made. I've chopped up this vocal track so many times, and I need to put fades at the beginning and ends of every single piece of this audio so there's no pops or anything happening. I could select across all of these at once, and Command F will add globally, automatically, to all those pieces of audio, these fades with these settings. So 10 milliseconds across the board, a crossfade here. I can change the slopes to these or customize each of these however I see fit, but it's going to add these fades now to every end and beginning of these tracks globally. So that saves you a little bit of time. So fades can be done in various different ways. And I can also kind of edit a fade if I zoom way in here and I get in here with my fade tool. I can kind of make some adjustments. Where's my trimmer? There we go. I can trim the edge of that. I can also delete fades if I click in the fade boxy area at the end there, kind of like what you see there. Hit delete, the fade's gone. I can add a new fade or do whatever. So you can also kind of trim the fades as well. So there's a little bit of functionality going on with that as well. This track view right here can be changed between the waveform and like a volume automation if I wanted to, say, like lower the volume of this, or use the pencil tool, which is, what is the pencil tool here? It's holding down Control on a Mac, but I can kind of like draw in automation lines like that, or I can just make a selection and use the little bracket looking thing to turn down various sections. Clip gain. So if I have these separate clips, say for instance this first little piece of audio, here we go, is quieter than the rest, and I want to turn that up without using volume automation, I can put a little incision there, Command E, and this little fader that shows up on the bottom left corner of every little piece of audio can be turned up. It's called clip gain, and it basically changes the volume, puts gain on that specific block of audio. The next thing, I want to show you how to bounce this audio out. Okay, so this is like a simple voiceover kind of thing. A couple different tracks, maybe a demo for your band or something. So we need to select the area that is going to be bounced. If I just hit bounce, it might bounce 5 minutes of blank audio here. I select the area that I want to bounce, make sure that my arrows are in between there and I'm covering the whole area. I go to File, Bounce to Disk, and I need to choose the format and all this good stuff. So if I want to bounce in WAV file format's your general high quality format. You can add MP3 by clicking that. The file format is really important, okay guys? So when you're bouncing a file, you're listening to it in stereo. When you're listening to it in iTunes or on the internet or something, it's stereo. It's left and right channel, okay? Together, left and right channel. So multiple mono is going to give you one bounce for the left, one bounce for the right. Doesn't quite work because you can't play 2 tracks at once in iTunes. So you want to be on interleaved, very important. Now, bit depth sample rate, CD quality standard sound is going to be 16-bit, 44.1 kilohertz. Okay, so if you're going to bounce something that's going to throw up on the internet or play on iTunes, you want to do it in the standard, sample rate bit depth of 16 and 44.1. You want to name your track. This is just a demo voice. Let's call it a name. I can choose where it's going to be saved if I want to save it in a specific location, but automatically it's going to save it in the bounced files folder, which is one of those folders inside of your main Pro Tools folder. It'll show up here under bounced files. So generally I just kind of leave stuff there unless I want to bounce it and put it on my desktop. I can choose to select my desktop there. And I often choose the offline bounce unless it's like the master bounce of a mastering session for an album that I'm about to release. I might bounce in real time because it's a little bit higher quality. Most of the time you're never going to notice the difference. I choose offline bounce because it's a very quick bounce. You don't have to sit there for the whole 5-minute song. I hit bounce. For MP3, I can change some of the encoder stuff and put the information about the album and artist and blah, blah, blah if I need to. I don't, so I'm just going to click OK. And it bounces very quickly, often, if it's not too long of a song. And your song or audio will show up inside here. I've got the MP3 and the wave. It's also good to check and make sure that these actually play.
Here we go. Microphone.
Okay, cool. It worked. And the length is right. It's, 10 seconds long like it should be. So check your work. Okay, guys. We'll call it there. Hope you learned some stuff about using Pro Tools. Kind of a beginner thing, but there's plenty of other videos I have up here on more advanced things like signal routing and mixing drums and mixing bands, recording bands. So check those videos out. Be sure to subscribe. And if you want private lessons and stuff like that, hit me up on the email. And we will see you in the next video. All right. Peace out.